mean, look, we're facing an axis of terror. The war in Ukraine has been a force multiplier for Russia, China, Iran, and I agree with you, North Korea, those four rogue states to come closer together. They're all competitors in a way, and but they see short-term value in opposing the United States.
Are the conflicts in Ukraine and Israel connected? What about Russia, Iran, and China? Our southern border, what is happening here in the United States? The massive wave of protests against Israel after those horrific attacks. What could possibly happen to us? Are we on the precipice of being attacked ourselves? That's a really important question right now. All of these conflicts are affecting the United States right now in ways that many of us don't quite understand yet, don't quite know yet. We're not connecting the dots yet. And I can tell you this, it is a surprise to many people within our government, the trajectory of what's happened, especially in Israel with that horrific attack. But what's also happening in Ukraine, what's the possible future of Russia? Who will replace Vladimir Putin if that happens? What's the end game there for Vladimir Putin? What's the end game for China? What are they seeking? What are they looking at? What is their strategy in our moment of weakness? And we can't forget the outliers like North Korea and other nations, and what's happening right now in Central America as people from all over the world, including Syria and Afghanistan and Iraq, are traversing the dangerous jungles of Panama, trying to access the border into the United States. And the possibility that terrorist attacks could happen here on our homeland are very real. 20-year-old Jordanian that was living 2 hours from me in Texas, here, right 2 hours from me in Houston, was allegedly trained with others of a radical mindset to possibly commit an attack after he illegally obtained firearms. That is according to the FBI. That's a real story. They just caught this guy planning to initiate an attack on American soil. And believe me, he's not the only one. It is important to understand the players, their motives, and their connections to these flashpoints around the world and right here at home. And I have a guest today who is going to help us understand those connections. He's going to give us an inside look into what our government is thinking about these conflicts. His name is Daniel Hoffman. He is a former CIA station chief. He is one of the most well-respected officers from the agency and has lived and traveled all over the world, even, in places like, Russia, Pakistan, everywhere. And he understands what's happening and can assess what is going on and give you the latest information. You do not want to miss this episode. The future of our country, the future of your family, the future of our communities depends on this, depends on us understanding what is going on so that we can help protect and save our own nation. But first, I'd like to thank Human Super Beats. Folks, we all have a heartfelt reason to support our blood pressure. In fact, more than half of the U.S. population would benefit from blood pressure support. I know I sure do. And I have my Super Beats. I took them this morning because guess what? I'm going to be on a flight to New York City and I need every bit of help keeping my blood pressure down on my way into the Big Apple. Paired with a healthy lifestyle, the antioxidants in Super Beats are clinically shown to be nearly 2 times more effective at promoting blood pressure, right? Normal blood pressure than a healthy lifestyle alone. And with my busy schedule, just like I said, Super Beet Chews are a quick and convenient way to do something that is good for my heart. They taste great and they give me a peace of mind about my health and my overall wellness. Double your potential with Super Beets Heart Chews. Get a free 30-day supply of Super Beets Heart Chews. And let me say it again, a free 30-day supply of Super Beats heart chews and 15% off your first order by going to getsuperbeats.com and using promo code Sara, S-A-R-A. That's getsuperbeets.com, code Sara. And I'm so happy to have my good friend Dan Hoffman on here. You're a 3-time CIA station chief and senior executive clandestine service officer. That is for the CIA. He was a secret spy officer. I would like to say that. I don't want to say secret agent, man, because that's incorrect. Agents are the people.
That's okay.
Agents aren't the agents the people that work for us, though? Not
Yes.
like, yeah. And I think that's the
Technically, that's true. But that was a great television show.
Yeah.
In the UK, and a great theme song too.
Yeah, I keep getting it. It's in my head. Secret Agent Man. I loved it. You led a large-scale HUMINT, that means Human Intelligence Gathering and Technical Programs with the agency. Your assignments included tours of duty in the former Soviet Union, Europe, and war zones in the Middle East and South Asia. In addition, you served as director of the CIA Middle East and North Africa Division. You are just an all-around, not only, I think, expert on national security and foreign policy, but you're just an awesome, awesome human being and friend, great father, amazing husband. I mean, really, your parents are just, I don't even know who they were, but they should write a book, or they should have had a book so we could raise all our children to turn out like you. And you have 2 beautiful sons. I wanted to start out with, though, because you and I were talking about this, but one of the biggest things in your life right now is really philanthropy. And of course, your children come first, but raising money to fight cancer, especially children's cancer, childhood cancer. Talk a little bit about that, because you have some big news about how much you raised.
Yeah. Listen, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world. And I feel like it's important for me and my sons to devote our life, our energy to helping kids in the fight for their lives against pediatric cancer, because that's the disease that took my wife's life 2 years ago. And we want to honor her memory. So we work with the Jessie Reese Foundation. Jessie Reese was 11 years old when she was diagnosed with brain cancer and passed away a year later. But before she passed away, came up with the idea of joy jars filled with toys and gifts and hats, because kids who have cancer lose their hair. And she understood, because she herself had cancer, that kids needed that kind of support, and it gave them a measure of resilience to fight cancer. And so my older son last year raised $200,000. He did a podcast. We had television coverage of our big event where we stuffed 3,000 joy jars at our local gym. And I'll just tell you, at the end of that day, after we had stuffed joy jars, 6 hours, 2 3-hour shifts, and my sons also ran Coach Faith's sweat-inducing basketball practice for an hour. At the end of that day, 100 of our friends and family who'd helped us that day had gone home, and it was just my sons and I and the Jessie Reese Foundation staff, volunteers, Eric Reese. Imagine being a father losing your daughter and dedicating your life. He was a pastor, and now he dedicates his life to this foundation named in his daughter's memory. And my son, Nathan, who was 9 at the time, was lifting boxes full of joy jars and putting them in crates so they could be shipped all over the world to the kids who need them most. And I looked at him and I said, "Hey, Nathan, where are you getting the energy? You didn't like the pizza, and I know you didn't drink the Starbucks coffee." And he looked at me with his mom's big, giant blue eyes, and he said, "Dad, we're stuffing joy jars today. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today, Dad." And I thought about that. It was such a poignant moment that, some days matter more than other days. I knew that at the CIA. Some days matter more than other days. Look at the Hamas attack on southern Israel, where you had civilians and reservists who woke up that morning not knowing that that day was going to matter more than any other day, maybe in their lives. And they went out and ran towards gunfire to try to save civilians under attack. That day mattered more than other days. It's a powerful lesson, and I took it to heart from my 9-year-old son. And so that's what we do with our lives. My sons and I, we had a big gala at Spyscape Museum in Manhattan last year and raised another over $200,000 for kids. And we'll be doing some more events in the coming months as well. So it's something we're going to dedicate ourselves going forward.
That's pretty powerful. And you're right. It is kind of a light bulb moment. And it's not something you could talk about it, but it's not something that you can necessarily teach unless that person internalizes it for themselves, right? So your son internalized that and realized at that moment, hey, Dad, it's okay. It's okay that I didn't eat. Today is the day that I've got to be doing this. And you're right. And you brought up, which has been, I think, one of the most difficult times for me right now, being haunted by, of course, and my husband and I talk about this quite often, memories of the war or Afghanistan or what happened in Iraq under Islamic State when they basically genocide the Yazidi people and their children. And then thinking about what happened in Israel. I was there just 2 months ago. Dan, I was in Israel. I was taking a tour with Israeli defense officials from, the border of Lebanon in the north, all the way to the Sinai, the Egyptian border. And I stopped at many of these kibbutz where it was raided by Hamas, by these horrific terrorists, which I can only describe as demonic, because you brought something up that is so important, and it's our children. And I thought of these kids and what happened with them, and that their families were witness to some of the most atrocious acts that any person, I don't even know to describe them as a person, could commit against a child. And I'm not even going to repeat it because I think everyone's heard these horrific stories. But what do you think, Dan? What possesses somebody to cross that line, these terrorists, and how serious of a threat are we facing as Americans of a possible terror attack in our country? Maybe something different, but something very much in line with targeting innocent civilians.
Well, listen, you and I have been around the world and we've seen the face of evil. I can tell you during my tour in Iraq, when I was there for a year during the surge, unimaginable evil from Al-Qaeda, from Shia terrorists, Iranian proxies in Iraq who would do despicable things, not just murder people, but do it in the most dehumanizing way. It's just extraordinary that those sorts of people can exist on the planet, but they do. And it's appropriate for us to think about this as we approach Veterans Day. That's why we have the best trained, best led, strongest military on the planet. Because if we didn't, we would face serious threats to our homeland and to our citizens all over the world. We owe a debt of gratitude to all our men and women in uniform and our veterans who have served. They're great role models for the next generation. And they've done us all an extraordinary service. You and I have veterans in our families, and we know what that means. The sacrifice, going to the most dangerous places on the planet, because those people exist. And if we don't deal with them, then they will find our citizens and bring harm upon us. So I think that that's the challenge we face in the world. And that's the one that Israel faces right now, dealing with this terrorist group. And what's so disappointing to me, I can tell you, there's a powerful, I think, motivation among some people just not to want to accept the truth for whatever it is. When my wife was diagnosed with cancer, I suppose I could have gone to a happy place and said, oh, maybe she doesn't have cancer. I'm going to act like she doesn't, or I'm going to think about, well, what if she didn't? Well, she did. And if you don't accept that truth for what it is, then you can just never deal with the problem that you're facing. And there's just this willful disregard for the bottom line truth that Hamas is, as you described, this ruthless, barbaric terrorist group seeking to do harm not just to innocent Israelis, but their own Palestinian population. And they are reportedly sniping them. The Palestinians who are seeking to go to places where they can be safe and secure and away from Hamas strongholds in Gaza, they're facing Hamas sniper fire. And, Hamas builds a lot of tunnels underground to protect themselves. But of course, above ground, they're using hospitals and neighborhoods and schools for their military bases and to launch missile attacks against Israel, knowing full well that they will incur a bloodbath, which is exactly what they want. So to get to your point about what these terrorists want, I think it's for sure for them, it's demonic revenge. It's that they want to be known, worldwide for what they're doing. We saw that with ISIS and Al Qaeda, but they want to incite followers worldwide. And in this era of social media, where people don't take the time to get the facts, including sadly in our own Congress, before they make decisions, there's a very large number of people who are vulnerable to being exploited. And so I am concerned about potential attacks in the United States, those who will see this battle raging in Gaza, not for what it is, but for something that might incite them to to commit their own violence. That's why we need state, local law enforcement and the FBI out there working hard. If folks see something, to say something. But it's a very tall order, especially in the kind of intensely dangerous atmosphere that we're living in right now all over the world.
I agree with you. I'm very worried. And you're someone who is very familiar with intelligence agencies and the possible failures that could lead to an attack actually taking place, or the missing pieces, not connecting the dots. I see our border as being very wide open. I remember being in Israel thinking to myself, this is phenomenal. This phenomenal presence. The Israeli government is really honed in on their national security. And so for me, it was shocking when the attack actually happened, because I had just been there. And I was like, what happened? Was there complacency? Was it that they felt they were too secure because they had the technology? What was this magnitude of failure by Mossad intelligence, which is supposed to be one of the best in the world? How did they not see this coming? How did we not see this coming? We didn't pick up chatter. It was being planned for 2 years. There was a definite feeling of like, whoa, wait a minute. We are really in a dangerous place right now. If they could miss this, imagine what else could have been missed.
Yeah, it was a perfect storm intelligence failure where Israel failed at the collection phase. So they didn't have human sources in Gaza who would have told them about the potential attack so that Israel could have preempted it before any harm was caused to their citizens. It was a failure of analysis to understand where the gaps might have been in their intelligence collection, failure to ask the questions, what is the potential impact of reconciliation with Saudi Arabia on top of the Abraham Accords have on Iran's calculus and Hamas's calculus in the region? And then executive leadership. At the end of the day, it's on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's on his shoulders, and there were failures there. For the U.S. intel community, we kind of outsourced the raw intelligence collection to Israel. Gaza's on their doorstep. It's easier and far more efficient and effective for them to do it. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have been doing our own analysis. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't have been asking Israel a lot of questions about their own collection. We could have been asking whether they red celled, that is, ask whether, the kind of counterfactual questions, or whether deterrence, which Israel had been mounting against Hamas, whether they think that that's going to carry on, and what would be the indicators that maybe their deterrence strategy was not succeeding anymore. There were just composite failures that I'm sure Israel and the United States will get to, because we're democracies and that's what we do. But intelligence, as you rightly point out, is critical to mounting an effective campaign on the ground in Gaza. So Israel needs human sources to determine where are the terrorists hiding out. They've got to avoid killing hostages. And then they've got to avoid fratricidal friendly fire as well while they're doing all that. So it's an extraordinary challenge for them, but intelligence is key. And at the end of the day, there's a bit of counterinsurgency here. You want to drive a wedge between the Palestinian population and Hamas terrorists. That's why, aside from moral and ethical reasons, you want not to kill innocent civilians. But Hamas makes that extremely difficult because that's their way of trying to ensure that Israel's counterinsurgency strategy never succeeds.
Well, and you're right. And it is a perfect storm of sorts, because not only do you, I believe the United States has also failed in human intelligence collection. I think we don't have enough agents overseas providing what we need. I could be wrong, but I remember covering this even in Pakistan and overseas, wondering, like, do we even have who's left in Iran? Remember with the whole we were exposed in Iran, and we lost so many of our agents there because of those leaks. And because of those failures, and people don't know who to trust anymore. But I also think what is so unique about this day and age, and maybe you can help me clarify this in my mind, is that we have so many people in the United States that are so spoon-fed disinformation and lies in social media, in the public, by professors who've never traveled to these regions of the world, who may be swayed by their own ideological beliefs. And that's understandable. I mean, if you're a Palestinian and you're young and you see what's happening and maybe you just think in one direction, but are so swayed that even Americans, LGBTQ, whatever, people are jumping on this bandwagon, talking about Israel being genocidal. And a good majority of them, which was really fascinating to me in a recent study, didn't even know or really ever hear about the Holocaust. They didn't even realize the pogroms, were in place. They don't even have any concept of history. They're just in this moment believing what they are being spoon-fed.
Yeah, it's painful to hear. And I will tell you that, when I served at CIA, our analysts and when I testified on Capitol Hill, I have no predisposed ideological or political bias. Same thing when I'm on Fox News. I just try to give it to you straight. Here's the view from the Kremlin or Pyongyang or whatever. And I don't start with the answer or predisposed worldview necessarily. I'm just trying to look at the facts and then draw conclusions. And that art, as you rightly point out, seems to have been lost on a lot of our students who start with their view and willfully ensure that anything that might contradict their predisposed bias is walled off. And that means that they're ignorant, unfortunately. And on the college campuses, I don't think, and a number of them at least, they're not doing a good enough job of ensuring critical thinking and rigorous analysis and looking at all the facts. I can tell you my older son, who's just about to turn 14, takes a class in civics at school, and he's diving into what's going on around the world. And he has very nuanced answers about things because he just starts with, these are the facts. And then I'll draw my conclusions about what I think about them. But first, I'm going to take a look at the facts before I tell you what my conclusions are. And I applaud that, but sadly, that's not what we're seeing. And it's bias, it's prejudice, as you point out. And it means that we won't confront the problem we face when we do that. And we won't have very good solutions either, unfortunately.
Do you ever wonder what happens when we die? From Angel Studios, the force behind The Sound of Freedom and that great, wonderful series, The Chosen, comes an unprecedented deep dive into the phenomena of near-death experiences in the new movie, After Death. After Death makes a courageous venture into a hotly debated, mysterious subject by comparing near-death experience with cutting-edge scientific knowledge. Hear from experts in the fields of science, philosophy, and medicine, as well as firsthand experiences of people who have lived through death as they paint a fascinating picture of life in the next realm. And what's so stunning about this film is that there are actual people that have been proven clinically dead. They had no brain function. They had no ability to really hear, see, anything that was going on around them. This was a clinical death. And when they came back, they were able to describe with absolute accuracy and detail what was happening in the room with them, what was happening outside the room. How does that happen? What is that mystery? How is that even explainable, right? I mean, some things just aren't. You need to see this film. It's going to blow your mind, and it's going to make you closer to your own spirit, to your own faith. This groundbreaking project responds to the soul's innate desire to find meaning in life and solace in the future. Leave your preconceptions at the door and prepare for a never before seen glimpse into what the next life could entail in after death, in theaters now, folks. Get your tickets today or pay it forward at angel.com/Carter. That's CARTER. That's angel.com/Carter, CARTER. After death, the end is only the beginning. Rated PG-13. I want to shift a little bit because now that everything is, Israel focused, what do you foresee happening in Ukraine? I know that Zelensky was asked, and I can't remember if it was on NBC News or not, but asked if President Trump says he could resolve this, the former president, in 24 hours. And Zelensky said, yeah, well, tell him to come on over. He can visit me and we can talk, basically. The crisis in Ukraine, though, is still escalating. Vladimir Putin has not backed down. How dangerous of a threat are we seeing? And is the U.S. prepared to even handle what could potentially turn into escalations across the globe in multi-theaters? I mean, we're going to be drawn into them, I think, no matter what, whether it's Israel, Ukraine, or, Taiwan with China.
Well, I think we are naturally involved in those wars. We just don't have boots on the ground. But certainly involved with Israel's war in Gaza and supporting Ukraine against Vladimir Putin. The expenditure of that war, as Nikki Haley rightly points out more eloquently than anybody in the Biden administration, it's a teeny tiny percentage of our defense budget. We're cutting the Russian army down to size and supporting Ukraine's efforts to defend Europe from Russia's aggression. There's a moral, ethical reason when the Russians are deliberately bombing civilian neighborhoods and showing absolutely no concern whatsoever. It's not like the Ukrainians play by Hamas rules and put their military facilities in neighborhoods and maternity wards. No, the Russians bomb those places on purpose. Now, there's limits to U.S. leverage and how much of it we can bring to the fight. When President Trump says he could solve the crisis in a day, well, I suppose, and then he won't tell you how he's going to do it. Well, okay, that's politics, and that's what politicians do, and that's okay. But if he says that he's got to back it up in some way if he really wants anybody to believe he could. And I frankly, look, the war, as far as how that war is going to go, is more dependent upon Ukrainians and Russians fighting each other than anything else. The Russians have killed too many innocent civilians in Ukraine for Ukraine to stop. They want Russia out of their territory. And Vladimir Putin knows that if he were to withdraw, his regime security, already very perilous, would probably mean that he'd be removed from the Kremlin. And in Russia, it usually doesn't end well.
That's what I was going to say. If they were...
Yeah, but we never gave Ukraine what they needed as fast as they needed it. It took us too long to get them javelins and anti-tank weapons, and it took us too long to get them long-range artillery. And we still haven't given them the F-16 fighter aircraft that they need. Because of that, the war stretched out far longer than it should have. And there are Democrats and there are Republicans who find bipartisan consensus that the Biden team, they kind of were vulnerable to Russia's rhetorical nuclear brinkmanship, where they were afraid that if they gave Ukraine what Ukraine needed, that Vladimir Putin would use nuclear weapons. And that just wasn't true. And so that's what you've got 2 years into this war. And no, we can't, you can't expect Ukraine to fight on forever. And we didn't give them the opportunity to end the conflict sooner. I think what scares the Biden administration is a post-Putin Russia. And that is kind of scary. But the Putin Russia is even more scary. So that, to me, is the challenge there. We don't have unlimited leverage, but we have enough to do more good. And we haven't done it.
Do you think that they're going to try to, do you think this could possibly end with Putin being maybe taken out by people within his own government? Like, they don't see an alternative. What would be, I guess, Putin's endgame for him would be to take over the whole of Ukraine and be like, okay, I got it now. So let's move on to Poland. I don't know. Or
Well, I don't know that he's not in a place to move on to anywhere.
Right.
And his decision to invade Ukraine, a massive intelligence failure of his own, because he failed accurately to assess Ukraine's will and capacity to fight. And Zelensky, who's done more than anyone to awaken NATO from their post-Cold War slumber, Putin failed on all of that. And his own guy, the leader of Wagner, now dead, Yevgeny Prigozhin, said, there weren't any Nazis in Ukraine. We didn't have to fight this war. And look what we've got now. You got Finland as a member of NATO. That's hundreds of miles of NATO border that Russia now has to deal with a military that is arguably the second strongest in Europe now that, Ukraine is demonstrating their prowess on the battlefield. So, the concern for the United States is that there are far more radical nationalist Russians who would be maybe more inclined to even think about tactical nuclear weapons if Putin were to go. Putin has dealt pretty effectively with the left-wing populist element of those who oppose him, of the opposition. But that's a big question for the CIA, for the intelligence community. What happens after Vladimir Putin, and who might remove him from power? I can tell you that Russian intelligence doesn't like where Russia is today. They are subservient to China. They're not a junior partner. They're just completely on their knees, shipping oil to China at reduced prices and accepting Chinese crappy manufactured goods in response. The Russian security services were always concerned about Kim Jong-un, and now they're tight allies with North Korea and giving them satellite technology, which could be used for intercontinental ballistic missiles in return for the artillery on which they depend. Same thing with Iran, a long-term competitor, just like China. And they're in such need of Iranian drones that they're giving the Iranians military equipment. They're reportedly going to give Hezbollah air defense.
Right.
Right. So, this is all bad for Russia. They could have a relationship with Europe. And I wish our administration would say, hey, Russia, if you withdraw from Ukraine and stop the war, you can have gas and oil exports to Europe, and you can send your kids to schools in European capitals. But this is what has to happen first. This is and in both cases, in Gaza and in Ukraine, we have to outline what a post-conflict, what it looks like. In Gaza, there's got to be a post-conflict reconstruction plan. I was very concerned when Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel would be responsible for the security of Gaza. That's not what Palestinians want to hear. You want to drive a wedge between them and Hamas? Then turn it over to regional Arab states and the Palestinian Authority if they're up for it, and enable them to be up for it, where you build Gaza and without Hamas, where Palestinians have some economic opportunity and good governance.
Right. And before I go on to the last few questions, I want to delve into that just a little bit, because one of the issues that I have, Dan, and I know there's a lot of nuances in the Middle East, and maybe you can explain it to me, but I was approached on Twitter by the Saudi press secretary, who asked me to retweet some of his stuff. And I'm fine. I can, I'm looking at some of their stuff, and MBS, obviously was asking for things to slow down in Gaza. And he wanted those tweets out there to get the Biden administration to pay attention to it. But my thing is this. I get Shia Sunni. I get it. I get the problems between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But why doesn't Saudi Arabia, why don't the rest of the Arab leadership across the globe, and I understand they're worried about being threatened themselves, but why don't they stand up and say what Hamas did was unacceptable? This does not represent the Arab world or the Muslim people. And why don't they make the first step? Just say, we don't accept it. We will punish these criminals as well. They will not be welcome into our homeland. And, that's the first step maybe in dealing with Israel. But they won't do it.
Right. And look, but our own college kids won't do it either. They conflate Hamas terrorists with Palestinian civilians who deserve their human rights. Now, with those Arab countries, you're right. Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, a sworn enemy of Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. But those countries all have pro-Palestine populations. They would like nothing more than to rid the planet of Hamas, but they can't come out against Hamas out of concern that their populations won't see the difference between
Well, don't they
between the
need to make them?
Palestinians and
Don't they need to make them?
well,
Like, I mean,
ask our own people. Ask the United States of America why we can't do it. Why do
Why?
we have
Yeah.
why do we have protesters on the streets of New York completely conflating? They won't admit that Hamas is guilty of the most barbaric terrorist crimes. Before we talk about whatever economic opportunity and good governance Palestinians deserve, and they do, or you talk about the history of how they fled their homeland in 1948, but because Arab countries would not recognize at the time a two-state solution. So Palestinians have been pawns for 80 years, but no one seems to want to dive into those basic facts as you and I discussed. And these countries are, at times the concern is, are they brittle? That's certainly when you look at a dictatorship like China or Russia, and Iran, they're very brittle countries, and public protests can get out of hand and cause real problems for the leadership. Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan, Jordan, there's a lot of Palestinians, East Bankers. They've got to be very concerned about placating the will of their population. Look at what we heard in our country. Look at the advertisement. I normally don't get into the politics with you, but Representative Rashid Tlaib, made this advertisement about how, you can't count on us, President Biden, in 2024. What is this extortion, populist extortion?
But that's what we're seeing. We're seeing what has happened in the Middle East and across the globe for decades. All of a sudden, it's here in such a real, tangible, palpable way. And this is just me and my perceptions, Dan. I mean, I could be wrong, and I probably am. Correct me. But I feel as though it's not so much about assimilation and America and what America is doing for the basic fundamentals of the Constitution. My mom came from Cuba. She let that go. She would tell people all the time, I'm not a Cuban. I'm an American. I want to vote for the right people. I may have an accent. I may still eat black beans and rice. And I love salsa music, but I totally believe in this nation. I have seen a failure to assimilate, to really assimilate. I've seen the importation of other, which I'm fine with, but to the extremity of other cultural, maybe I don't even know how to put it together. It's a blending of both religious and political cultures inside America that conflicts with our own basic Constitution. It conflicts with the fundamentals of what America, actually is made up of, that fabric. And I don't know if that's going to be a problem.
I mean, that's a really big issue you're getting to right there. I will say the Cubans, you all are in a different place. I got a buddy from CIA, Rick Prado, who's...
Oh my gosh, I love Rick Prado. I've had him on the show. Guy. He's so great.
Yep. But look, Cuban Americans fled the Castro regime, most of them, and they have no love lost for Castro or his successors. They have a great attitude. They're in favor of doing right by the Cuban people. And so no issues there. That's a great case, a simple case in many ways. I will tell you something, Finland where I served, which is why I use them as an example. They're a very small country, just a few million people, and very difficult language.
Yeah, you speak it amazing, by the way. I got to tell everybody, I was in Finland with Dan. And I was standing right next to him the whole time. Like, we get in a taxi, Dan can get us to where we need to go. The Finnish language is off the charts, hard to learn. And you spoke it like you were Finnish.
Well, you're kind. So the Finns have a saying. Lots of countries have this saying, but the Finns say, "Maassa maan tavalla tai maasta pois." So essentially, it's do it our way or get out. And so when there were these crises in Europe where you had an influx of population that didn't necessarily adhere to the local law, then the Finns said, hey, if you can't adhere to our democratic ways, well, then you're just not going to be here anymore. And that's a crisis for Europe to deal with. Now, you and I are onto a bigger topic than some, CIA intel guys probably qualified to talk about. But I will tell you, I saw it in Finland, and we're seeing it in Europe right now. And it's something that Europe is grappling with. It's something that we're grappling with too, which is that it's not just immigrants. I mean, it's across the board. You can have people who've been here for centuries too. I mean, it's just, there's got to be an acceptance of, yes, as you said, the Constitution and our basic democratic principles, liberty, freedom of speech. But that, to me, in our country, at least, it comes down to like teaching civics and teaching kids about our country and about what we hold near and dear to us. And when we look to role models, politicians sometimes, because they're the ones out there speaking, like they have to take it upon themselves. They have a bully pulpit, and they're speaking to their followers and our population writ large. And when they do that in such a way that demeans what makes our country great, then shame on them.
I agree with you. That is very true. And you brought up Nikki Haley earlier, and I think she's brilliant. I've had her on the show. I think she did a phenomenal job as the UN ambassador. I think she really has a great fundamental understanding of what's happening overseas and what is going on with our nation. I really do find her like a brilliant mind, out in the sea of all of this craziness, right? And one of the issues I want to close out with, I just wanted to get your background on it, is something I talked to her about is the Iran, China, Russia trifecta, and then I always dangle North Korea off to the side. But this is this is a realignment, a geopolitical realignment, in my opinion, of the world. I think that they're trying to do that. I think the United States is on the precipice of something very significant that could change us for the next maybe 100 years if we don't watch out, if we don't take care of business at home and we don't protect our nation the way we need to. We could actually lose our place in the world. Could you talk a little bit about that? Or am I just doomsdaying this?
No, I think you're right. I mean, look, we're facing an axis of terror. The war in Ukraine has been a force multiplier for Russia, China, Iran, and I agree with you, North Korea, those four rogue states to come closer together. They're all competitors in a way, and but they see short-term value in opposing the United States. So what we need, is a comprehensive strategy to deal with them and understand the world is pretty interconnected and a lot smaller than it used to be, where in the old days, geographic separation gave us a lot of security. And we saw in the last century, my family fought in the world wars, World War I and World War II. That just doesn't exist anymore. And so we need to work with our allies and our partners. We need to be super careful about putting our own boots on the ground, but we can do it with super small numbers to target terrorists when we need to. But we need to have good allies and partners. Look at the Philippines right now, and Japan and South Korea, extraordinarily valuable to us in confronting and defending against China and deterring China's aggression in that region. And Israel, obviously, an incredibly important ally in the Middle East. And so I think that's important for us. And we are seeing a realignment right now where United States leadership on the world stage is incredibly important. And we should understand that the mistakes we made after 9/11, and we did some fantastic things in terms of taking the fight to Al-Qaeda, but we all could have known that allowing sanctuary for our enemy, whether it was in Pakistan for Al-Qaeda or in Iran for those Shia militant groups, was going to mean that we couldn't accomplish whatever Don Quixote mission we had of trying to build a democracy out of Iraq or Afghanistan. We've been in those places. They're not exactly ripe for democracy. And we shouldn't have known that it was not the best investment of our money and our blood and treasure to try to do that. And look, I'm all about building girls' schools. I just don't think it was the best idea to do it in Afghanistan. We went there to kill Al-Qaeda guys. That's what we should have been doing, and let them figure out the rest of it. And if they're not, if there's no Al-Qaeda guys left in Afghanistan, well, that's just fine. And they can figure out how they want to live on their own. And I think that's something that we've learned, and going forward, that's where we have to think about, America's place in the world, in my humble opinion, at least, and effective and smart allocation of all of our resources, our precious resources, starting with our human resources, that our brave military and our intelligence community folks who deploy to those dangerous locations. Now, I'll just give you one last point, which is we do need to be places. We don't have anyone in Afghanistan anymore. And, this administration likes to talk about over the horizon capabilities. Talk to anybody. There's no such thing as over the horizon. You can't see it. It doesn't exist. And it's a super sweet sounding phrase. But what concerns me is we don't have anyone there to know where the threats are from ISIS and from Al-Qaeda, and then to do something about it. And so we don't need to be deploying 100,000 troops to Afghanistan, but maybe a couple thousand if we had stayed to keep the lid on the terrorist problem there, because it's a failed state. And next door in Pakistan, another failed state with nuclear weapons. So look, there's a lot of stuff to keep you up at night. And to get back to what we talked about at the very beginning, that's why I just hug my kids close and try to win small victories at home, on the soccer field, or raising money for kids with cancer, because a lot of times that's about all you can handle,
Right. Those are the things we can do. We can accomplish. I mean, we can't throw our hands up in the air and give up. We can pray that we put all of our resources in the right area. And I really do pray that regardless of who is in office next year, that whoever that is does the right thing by all of us for the future of our children and the future of our nation, Dan, because I think that right now we are facing some really major challenges that could potentially lead us in a direction that terrifies me. I'm just hoping that people are listening. That's why I have you on the show. And you mentioned Don Quixote and Afghanistan. Gosh, that is so true. I had just this picture in my mind of, what was going on there. It was like we were fighting the windmills, because,
100%.
the schools were, those schools were being built and being blown up the next day. It was the craziest stuff. And I agree with you. We need more resources overseas allocated the right way. We need more HUMIT. We need great thinkers strategizing and giving our president, whoever that may be, even now, I don't even know who that is, but giving them the actual tangible, real information so that they can make the best decisions for our country and for the Western world. And I think that's all we can ask for. And I can't believe how much money you guys have raised. I would love to do whatever I can to help you out and your son out. And I will.
Well, we'll come back to you on that one.
Okay, please.
Thank you for that.
No, please let me know, because we can bring you on the podcast. I can go out there and be a part of one of your fundraising events. I would love that. I'm so honored to have you as a friend, and so blessed.
Same here. And thank you for having me on the podcast. I think about some of the other ones we did, including during the COVID days. We were you had me on, and it's always a pleasure to chat with you. It's more fun when we're traveling overseas for a summit to cover one of those together. So we can only hope that down the road we get that opportunity again.
Oh, absolutely. I know it. I feel it. I feel it in my bones. We will get that opportunity again. So thanks so much, Daniel. I'm going to set you free.
My pleasure.
Again, I want to thank Daniel for coming on the show today. And I want to say thank you again to his wonderful children who are doing so much to raise awareness of childhood cancer. May we all be so blessed to be so good-hearted and helpful and wonderful that even in our worst tragedies, we find it in our hearts to help our neighbors and our community and our nation. Remember that lesson, folks. That's from children teaching us the right way to be. Please make sure you are subscribed to the Sarah Carter Show here on your favorite podcast app. It really does help. Follow me on Truth at Sarah Carter Official, on X at Sarah Carter DC, and on Instagram at SCarterDC. God bless you. God bless this amazingly beautiful planet. Hopefully we do not end up destroying it for ourselves or destroying ourselves. Let's find a way to pray for peace. Let's find a way to pray for a future where our children will be free of all of this hardship and horror. Really, that is my true prayer. And God bless our beautiful nation and the great state of Texas.